Hi everybody, I am here getting ready for the show tonight, and I have not been feeling very good lately, as I'm sure you have not been feeling very good lately, as there's not a lot to feel good about going on right now. But one of the things that has been close to my heart has been this book by Campbell. It's The Romance of the Grail, and in my work and our time's work, we do use a lot of imagery from fantasy and from medieval art, because I think that it really reflects things and themes that are going on today as well. But in an effort to, chin up and be yourself, I want to read this passage from the chapter The Wasteland. And I wanted to just put a video of Campbell reading it, but there's none, so I will do my best. In the Middle Ages, we find two principles of social life: living as one ought to on the one hand, and on the other hand, love, which ripped one out of its social norm. The dislocation between these two is represented in the Grail legend as the Wasteland. In the Wasteland, life is fake. People are living in a manner that is not that of their nature, and they are living according to a system of rules. And this is represented in turn by a wounded king, whose wound had turned the whole country into waste. The aim of the Grail Knight, then, is to heal that king. How can that king be healed? That wounded king. And where does this wasteland come from? And where do heroes come from? Overwhelmed with grief at her husband's death, Lloyd withdraws from the world of courts and battle to a solitary cottage in the woods, where she gives birth to a son, Parzival, whom she plans to keep there all to herself and in ignorance of knighthood. But there was at the time a great need in the world for such an authentic hero, as her little son was to grow to be. And there was no way a mother can defend her child from the summons of his own nature. This need of the medieval world was symbolized in the Grail romances in the image of the wasteland, an enchantment of sterility cast over the whole society, which it is to be the task of the hero to undo. T.S. Eliot, in his poem The Wasteland, published in 1922, applied the motif to a characterization of our own day and general problem. Many will recognize the memorable lines: "What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish?" Modern commentators have recognized this motif as a reflection of the well-known primitive superstition discussed by Fraser in The Golden Bough, of the king's health and well-being as the cause and support of his realm's well-being. It is a primitive, magical idea. What could it have meant to a modern poet like Eliot, or to a medieval poet like Wolfram? As I've said before, the period of the flowering of Arthurian romance lasted roughly from the mid-12th to the mid-13th century. The earliest work in which Arthur's name appears dates from 1136, and all the great Grail romances appeared between 1180 and 1230. It was a glorious primal time for Europe, comparable in importance to the Homeric period for the classical world. But there was a grim negative side to the picture as well. Hard by the cathedral, as the historian Oswald Spengler reminds us, were the gallows and the wheel. And there was the Albigensian crusade of Innocent III. In brief, people were being forced to profess beliefs they did not hold. Others, through inheritance and political intrigue, were holding high positions in politically oriented church for which they were not spiritually qualified. Marriages were being contracted for social and political ends that a clergy was then blessing and binding in a way of what was called a sacrament. And love could only enter lives in the way of the disaster of the so-called mortal sin, the sin namely of adultery, which was punishable by death. And in this light, we can read with interest the passage in Gottfried von Strasberg's Tristan, where the poet tells of the young couple's drinking of the love potion. It is, of course, an accident, and when The maid Brigine, who was responsible for the potion and for Isolde, realizes what has happened. She comes to Tristan. Appalled to him, it says, "That flask, and what it contained will be your death." To which he answers, and I think this is the greatest answer. It says, "So then, God's will be done. If Isolde, to my death this way, I shall gladly court an eternal death." That is to say, he accepts not only the physical death of the Church and society's punishment for the crime of love, but even eternal death in the fires of actual hell. Such spiritual courage in the prospect of torture everlasting typifies the heroism of anyone of that period thinking to live a life of his own. It says something to us also of the power and courage of a perfect love in any age. As Meister Eckhart declared, "Love knows no pain. The middle way, the way of one who would, in Wolfram's gloss of Parsifal's name, pierce the valley, is not an easy way, and may require this traveller's indifference to the opinion not only of the world but also of its God." And to this, another line of the mystic Eckhart: "Man's leave-taking is the leaving of God for God, and as Lao Tzu put it, the way that can be named is not the way." The God named and supposed to be known, together with his opposite, the devil, is to be left behind in the passage by the middle way, to the tree by the well, and where the white birds merrily sing. The wasteland, then, is the land of people living in authentic lives, doing what they think they must do to live, not spontaneously in the affirmation of life, but dutifully, obediently, and ever grudgingly, because that is the way people are living. That is what T.S. Eliot saw in the wasteland of the 20th century, and that is what Wolfram von Eschbach's Eliot's model saw in the wasteland of the 13th.